What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Very Cold Lasagna, the podcast that houses a safe and open listening platform for casual, cold, and all the dumb takes on the world of pro wrestling and sports. I am your host, DylanLasagna. Welcome to today's episode number 93 of this freezing cold podcast that houses the icy and spicy lasagna. And I gotta say, before we get into the theme of today's episode, it is honestly kind of refreshing. It kind of feels good to be on the mic once again, be with you all, whether it's in your ears or in your face, wherever you're listening or watching Very Cold Lasagna on your mobile device or on your computer. If I make your day, I really appreciate it. But anyway, we're back in business after our little break. After the Super Bowl, I decided to go on a little, not like really like a vacation of sorts, but just take a little breather, a little week-long breather. Catch myself. After having covered a season's worth of football, I thought I'd give myself a little bit of a bye week myself. Now that the NFL offseason is in full swing, might as well use this time to give myself a little bit of breather, and as well for all of you to explore your interests, explore other stuff. I don't know, whatever you wanted to do during the time off. I did put up some videos on the YouTube channel talking about Trey Lance, and also talking about some wrestling stuff as well. I haven't talked about wrestling in over 6 months until the most recent video that I put up talking about Cesaro leaving the WWE. So that's probably the most up-to-date thing that you're going to hear from me about pro wrestling. Other than that, I haven't really done much during my break. Just chilling, relaxing. I watched the NBA All-Star game. The slam dunk contest was pretty shitty though. And then I'm trying to, ease my way back into pro wrestling a little bit, I guess, because it's WrestleMania season. It's the one time of year where everyone's supposed to watch wrestling, pal. But in all honesty, all pro wrestling, whether it's WWE or AEW, it's just trash, man. It's really trash. It's really hard to get into it. All the highlights that I see on Twitter, it's just the same old shit. It really is the same old shit. The one thing that does intrigue me though, actually there's a couple of things. The couple of things that do intrigue me with wrestling is this undisputed championship match that's going to happen at WrestleMania between Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar. So I'm kind of excited for that, and whatever the hell is going to happen on the Pat McAfee show with Vince McMahon. Apparently, from what the dirt sheets are saying, this is going to lead to a match between Pat and Vince at Mania. Vince is 76 years old, and I'm not sure if he's at the age that he can wrestle, but if he is, then okay, sure, why not? But interesting stuff there. That's some interesting stuff that I guess that can be a thing at Mania. But other than that, the WrestleMania 38 card is kind of looking like dog shit too. And then there's also AEW Revolution. And people are already saying that it's gonna put WrestleMania to shame when you had pretty much nothing interesting other than, I guess, Britt Baker and Thunder Rosa in a rematch from last year. Their match from last year, I guess. I don't know. There's nothing really interesting on that Revolution card that makes it revolutionary or gonna shame WrestleMania. Come on, really? But anyway, whatever fans want to get their hopes up for. So that's pretty much what I've been doing during my little break, and probably what I'm going to be doing throughout the off season as we head towards the 2022 NFL season and as we head towards the NFL draft. Obviously, wrestling is not going to go away on this channel, but on this podcast, but wrestling is in such a down period that I don't know. Some things are just not worth mentioning. But what is worth mentioning is more NFL talk. Yes, we are in the NFL offseason, but I feel like this month is a good time to revisit. It's kind of like a retro review of sorts, but it's still recent times with this NFL season, because we're gonna take a trip down to memory lane. This entire month of March is NFL season recap month. Yes, March. It's March Madness here on Very Cold Lasagna, but not the March Madness you think. The month of March is NFL season recap month 2021, even though it's 2022, but you get my point. So all throughout this month, we're going to be recapping all 31 NFL teams in the NFL and each of their individual seasons in, I'm not sure how many parts, in how many episodes, but we're going to make sure we cover all 31 NFL teams. But wait a minute. Isn't there 32 teams in the NFL? But correct me if I'm wrong. We already did my San Francisco 49ers back last month. Yes, there is 32 teams, but we already did one team, and that was my San Francisco 49ers last month after they lost the NFC Championship game. So their season recap is already done. We've already did that. If you missed that, go watch that wherever you get your podcasts. So how this works is we're going to work our way up from worst to the best. We're going to take our trip to Dumpster Town and then work our way up to whatever the next town is going to be called. So if you, for whatever reason, you don't want to see the full episode, you don't want to go through the timestamps and whatnot, I will be uploading all the season recaps through clips throughout the month. Normally it'll be after each episode comes out. So, hey, if you want to watch the full episode and see all the teams, or you just want to watch the clips of your team and relive the sadness or the happiness of your team, or maybe the potential of your future for your team, you have options. The clips will, of course, will be exclusive to YouTube, but the full episodes will be multi-platform. Going into the season recaps, just keep in mind though that I may miss on some important details that some of you may point out, may tic-tac on your little checklist, and you're probably going to be like, oh, why didn't you cover this? Why didn't you cover that in a season recap? Don't get triggered. Don't get your panties in a bunch. If I miss something, it's my fault, okay? I don't remember everything. I don't keep track of everything, all right? So just keep that in mind. And there's also going to be some things that all are late and out of date, especially when we head towards free agency, when we get to the back half of the other teams, like the Packers, the Bills, the Rams, or the Patriots. When we get to those teams later on, we're going to be in that period of free agency where I might not be able to talk about their team needs because, well, we're in the midst of free agency. I mean, I could transition it over to the draft, but we might be shit out of luck when I talk about some key essentials there. So just a little preview of what's to come in the next coming month of Very Cold Lasagna. But anyway, with that being said, let's begin our March Madness here on Very Cold Lasagna season recap month on Very Cold Lasagna, beginning with part 1 of my NFL season team recaps 2021. Let's begin. So kicking things off with our season recaps is the team that won it all by being the absolute worst of the worst in Dumpster Town. We're going to Dumpster Town first, and we begin with the head residents of Dumpster Town for the second straight year, the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are sponsored by All Elite Wrestling. Oh man, when you look at the Jaguars in their last 2 seasons, they're pretty goddamn awful. They were pretty damn awful. When you look at their 2020, the year prior, they won their first game. They beat Phillip Rivers and the Indianapolis Colts in their first game. But then they went on to win by losing the rest of their games. They went 1-15, got the first overall pick in the 2021 NFL draft. And then when you reach towards the end of the season, they fired their head coach, Doug Marrone, who surprisingly was still there by that point. And then mid-season, general manager David Caldwell was gone too. So both of them overall provided, some pretty bad results, especially when it came to drafting players. And then even though they drafted a few good players, they couldn't really develop them. They really put them in some shitty situations. And then last year, when you get to January of last year, they hire Urban Meyer. And you think, okay, maybe this might be a good hire for Jacksonville. Maybe this could be the thing that turns them around. You get a former college football head coach, known for his time in Ohio State, who won a national championship in 2014, and maybe could turn this thing around. And like not every college head coach has had success, being a successful head coach in the NFL. And then the Jaguars went ass backwards as well. They decided to promote director of player personnel, and Niners fans know him very well. Former general manager of the 49ers, Trent Baalke, to be the permanent general manager. From the very beginning, oh man, you knew this was going to be very bad for Jacksonville. You know this was going to be an all-elite shit show. And from the very start, it was. It kind of was going to begin that way. Once Urban Meyer stepped into the building, you knew that wave of controversy was going to begin. When he assembled the staff together, he hired a former Iowa State strength and conditioning coach, Chris Doyle, to be the team strength and conditioning coach. But then a day later, he resigned because there were allegations of racism and player bullying. And once word got out of that, and the immediate fan backlash went out, he resigned. And then a couple months later, they signed Tim Tebow, who wanted to make a comeback in the NFL and who wanted to play tight end, even though he never played the position whatsoever. So, yikes. What a shit show it was going to be. So nonetheless, the Jaguars proceed forward in trying to rebuild their team around a new quarterback in mind. I mean, as expected, it was going to be Trevor Lawrence, who they picked number 1 overall. And then in that draft, they would address some more pressing concerns, like getting an offensive tackle and getting a corner. And then in free agency a month earlier, they had the most cap space available, but they didn't really do much with it for whatever reason. They added Marvin Jones in free agency, but he's an aging piece. And they did try to address the corner position, but it didn't really produce many results. Like they got corner Shaquille Griffin and safety Rayshawn Jenkins, both of whom weren't really stout talent for the Jaguars in 2021. So by the start of the season, the Jaguars, they still possessed a rebuilding team. You'd think in mind that thered be some hope of progress in 2021 and things would be, a little bit better than 2020. But then you get to the season. Oh man. Sure. They went, they slightly improved on the record. They went 3-14. But man, behind that record, you see once you see behind that record, everything just went completely wrong. Things honestly felt completely worse than the previous year. They start the season 0-5. Trevor Lawrence looked nothing like the QB most were accustomed to in Clemson. Trevor Lawrence overall had a pretty bad year. He only picked things up in pretty much the last couple of games. But then again, when you look at it from a team perspective, Trevor Lawrence wasn't developing well because Urban Meyer was pretty much micromanaging everything, and then Trevor Lawrence didn't really have much of a supporting cast. But then Lawrence also had his own struggles too. So they managed to beat the Miami Dolphins in London. So they snapped a 15-game losing streak. And they also managed to upset the Buffalo Bills in Jacksonville, the Josh Allenception game. But even then, they won, 2 games by that point, and they weren't really progressing much. They weren't making any positive, vibes in the rebuild. And it mostly is because of Urban Meyer, who was just casually on for the ride. And by December, his season was about to come to a crashing halt because he was getting into some weird shit. He was getting into some elite shit, I guess you could per se. And by December, he got fired. Yes, he got fired. And why did he get fired? Well, it all began when the Jaguars lost to the Cincinnati Bengals in Week 5. Rather than flying back to with this team, and try to cheer them up, try to give them some positive advice on how to recover from another loss, he went to his Columbus restaurant to party and touch a woman. Yeah, what does that tell you? So he also benched one of the best players of that year, James Robinson, their running back, during blowout losses to the Seahawks and the Rams, and he tried to hide behind that, claiming that it was injury related, especially during the Rams game. When, I get it that you want to not injure your players, but damn, it's like you want to get them as much experience as much playing time as possible. And like I said, December was pretty much the tipping point. There were reports about players and coaches finally being fed up of Meyer's treatment because Urban Meyer was trying to treat it like the players were his college students and his college coaches, or the NFL coaches, were his college coaches, because you hear reports about Meyer treating them like students rather than men, and coaches being called losers. Marvin Jones even got into a heated argument, and then Josh Lambo came out and said that Urban Meyer kicked him in the leg during the preseason practice. And Urban Meyer, his response was that allegedly, when Josh Lambo told him not to kick him in the leg, he told him that, fuck you, I'll kick you whenever I want. And that was the last straw for owner Shahid Khan to fire his ass, to show him the door in December. I'm kind of surprised, I guess. I don't know if I'm surprised, but I'm a little surprised that there weren't reports of Urban Meyer doing some weird things with Tony Khan and the elite in AEW. I wonder why Shahid Khan didn't fire him over that. So anyway, the rest of the year, I guess it didn't really go so well for the Jaguars. So Darrell Bevell, their offensive coordinator, replaces Urban Meyer for the rest of the games. But I guess on a more positive note, they managed to upset the Indianapolis Colts in the final game of the regular season. Trevor Lawrence finally had a good game. The rest of the team also had a good team effort, shutting down Jonathan Taylor and getting to Carson Wentz, who pretty much had a terrible game himself. And they eliminated the Colts from playoff contention. So you can at least say, for as stupid as the Urban Meyer signing was, at least Shahid Khan decided to cut bait before things got even worse, I guess. But still, his dumbass decided to keep Trent Baalke, and the fans, in the final game of the season, they responded in kind, and rightfully so. They showed up in the season finale in clown costumes. Yes, that is the entire embodiment of the Jaguar season. It was a clown show. So overall, the Jaguars, still the worst team in the NFL by any stretch of the imagination. But I guess if you had a few positives for this very disastrous Jaguar season, Trevor Lawrence, I will give him this. He's a clear team leader. You can tell with his calm, humble demeanor. He clearly speaks not just for himself, but the entire team. He tries to like pinpoint issues as a team problem. So Trevor Lawrence clearly a team leader. They also had some good production from their rookies, such as Tyson Campbell, the corner, and a receiver like Laquan Treadwell and James Robinson. And as I mentioned before, the upset wins over the Buffalo Bills and the Indianapolis Colts throughout the season. But still, they're 3-14, and they went through a very, very controversial season. And even though they have the number 1 overall pick, they're still in pretty rough shape mentally. But I mean, going into this offseason, going into free agency in a couple weeks, they still have the second most money to spend at $59 million. And they did hire Doug Peterson as their head coach. With Doug Peterson, he's a former Super Bowl winning head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, yes, his tenure did end in a little bit of controversy with him and Carson Wentz. But, Peterson has proven that he can develop young quarterbacks, as with the case with Carson Wentz in his near MVP season before he tore his ACL and that drastically affected his career. And again, he led the Eagles to a Super Bowl title with Nick Foles before he became FIALS, Nick Fails, filling in for Carson Wentz. So I think Trevor Lawrence, if he gets the proper supporting cast around him, he could benefit eventually with Peterson as his coach. So going to the offseason, Jaguars are still going to be a shitty team in 2022, but what they need to do in this offseason, be it free agency and the draft, is that they got to get a supporting cast for Trevor Lawrence. The biggest priority is the offensive line, because that offensive line was not giving Trevor Lawrence time to throw. Trevor Lawrence had to run in the pocket, or he was taking a lot of hits and sacks in the regular season. You also have to get Trevor Lawrence a top veteran receiver in free agency. I don't know who that is. They're probably not luring someone like Devontae Adams into Jacksonville. He's not getting into that all elite shit show. They also have to decide what to do with the number 1 overall pick. They can go for an offensive lineman at number 1, but they have to assure that whichever offensive lineman that is, it's the right one for them. That screams, this is the guy that can protect Trevor Lawrence in 2022. That's ready to start in that front. I mean, they can also trade it away, but then again, it's I don't know if it's whatever they want to do. So for the Jaguars, they're not going to be competitors. They're not going to be competitors, like probably not next year, not even in 2023. But even if Trent Baalke is running the show, like for as stupid as he is, if he somehow makes all these somewhat right moves and does decently in the draft, the Jaguars, in a couple of years, they may shed themselves from what this year was, an all elite shit show in 2021. They can, because this year, this 2021 season was an all elite shit show. They had Urban Meyer as head coach, and he went on to do this crazy things that was just a bullying point for even Shahid Khan. Shahid Khan found out the hard way, and well, he got Doug Peterson, I guess. So he rectified that. So overall, the Jaguars are not going anywhere in 2022, but man, I guess there's nowhere to go but up. Next up, we have the Detroit Lions, who went 3-13-1 in this 2021 campaign. So for the Lions, for a team that went 3-13-1, that just had 3 wins, just like the Jaguars, but except they had 1 tie, which we'll get into in a bit. The Lions, I gotta say, for this team that loves to Detroit so much, they actually have a little bit of hope for the future. Why is that? Well, let's get in. Let's talk about it. The Lions in their last several seasons, they've gone 4-12, 5-11, 3-13 in the last couple of years. So recently, the Lions went 5-11 in 2020, and during that point, they fired their previous head coach, Matt Patricia, as well as their previous general manager, Bob Quinn. This was after the Thanksgiving blowout loss to the Houston Texans. Detroit ended up hiring former Saints assistant coach Dan Campbell to be the next head coach. He was an offensive-minded coach that used to play tight end in the 2000s. And as their new general manager, Brad Holmes, he was a longtime college scout for the LA Rams, and he became the new general manager and the new executive vice president. So Holmes had to decide what to do with Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford was still on the team. Stafford made it pretty clear that his time as Detroit is over, that he wanted to go to a team in a winning situation. So what Holmes decided to do in his first move as the general manager was make the blockbuster trade of trading away Matthew Stafford to the LA Rams for 2 first-round picks, a 3rd-round pick, and getting the Rams' old stack of trash, Jared Goff, in Detroit. So it was pretty evident that Detroit was in full rebuild mode. Throughout the offseason, they weren't really that active in free agency, and a lot of their free agent signings were 1 to 2 year rentals. They also lost Kenny Golladay, their best receiver throughout the years. They did re-sign their key defensive end Romeo Okawa, and their draft was pretty much where they would do all their work. They selected with their 7th overall pick Oregon tackle Penei Sewell and USC wide receiver Amon-Ra St. Brown in the 4th round, who we'll discuss in a little bit. So looking into this Lions team preseason, they looked one of the prime teams that would contend for the number 1 overall pick. When you look at this roster that had Jared Goff under center and a defense that was going to get exploited big, it seemed that way of the Lions being one of those teams that was going to get roasted for a good chunk of their games. But in all actuality, when you look at their first 8 games, aside from the Philadelphia Eagles game in, I think it was week 8. So Dan Campbell actually had them fighting. He actually had them competing until the final whistle. And they only lost by just 1 touchdown in 6 of those games. Especially when you look at the one in week 3 against the Ravens. Man, that was heartbreaking. But during that time, the offense looked decent. Despite Jared Goff goofing it up most of the time. They would end up having some notably good players, like Penei Sewell, who I think he moved to, I forgot what his position was. I'm not sure if he was left or right tackle, but I think he swapped between one of the other two. But either way, he did noticeably better if he made a switch. They also had running back DeAndre Swift, tight end TJ Hawkinson, and then eventually later on, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Amon-Ra St. Brown became a key foundational piece. The defense, though, was not great at all. The secondary missed a lot of tackles, and they would severely lapse in coverages, which allow receivers to pretty much roast them for much of the game. The pass rush was also severely lacking. They didn't really have anybody in the defensive line, mainly because they were getting injured. So, nonetheless, they reached the midway point, 0-8. I think that they all at that point when they faced the Pittsburgh Steelers, they got their first win. They tied the Pittsburgh Steelers, but damn, that was embarrassing. So it wasn't until week 13 where they faced the Minnesota Vikings and Kirk Cousins, and the Vikings typically shit the bed. And it all it took for the Lions to get their first actual win of the season, well, a lapse in coverage by the Vikings' terrible defense. And Amon-Ra St. Brown got the winning touchdown from Jared Goff, and the Lions got their first win. So I guess that's a plus for the Lions. So overall, I also forgot, they also had a upset-filled blowout against a Cardinals team that was trying to compete against the LA Rams for the NFC West. Yes, they completely destroyed Kyler Murray in that offense. And I think, in my opinion, was much better than the Vikings game that got them their first win. Goff would outplay his former NFC West rival, Kyler Murray, in week 15. So overall, they did go 3-13-1. No, 3-13-1? Yeah. I don't know. I don't remember these records anymore. But anyway, they went 3-13-1. And yes, they have the number 2 overall pick in the draft. But when you look at the future of this Lions team, I mean, sure, they have crappy ownership, but what Dan Campbell is doing for this team, it could be something good in a couple of years. It's just that don't have him call plays on offense. No, just don't. So going into the offseason, going into free agency, going into the draft, there's some things to address. You have to address the defense because the Lions were pretty bad at it. They were pretty bad. They have to address safety and corner. And for as much as the Lions were bad on defense when it came to coverages, they weren't really able to generate many turnovers. So if they can get a quality upgrade in their secondary, it could lead to some good things for the defensive unit and not get them as roasted as much. Wide receiver, I mean, they got a potential good player in Amon-Ra St. Brown, but they're still lacking someone on the opposite side. So especially for next season when teams are going to have enough film on Amon-Ra St. Brown, the Lions are going to have to find another piece on the opposite end for whoever the QB is going to be. Most likely it's going to be Jared Goff. For Goff or whoever the quarterback is to throw to, because people are going to be going after St. Brown next season. Quarterback, I mean, I'm not sure if the Lions are going to try to address it this offseason, but it's something that they could possibly consider. But looking at this year's quarterback prospects, I don't think it's worth the risk. Like, especially not in the first round. Not in the first round. Maybe in like the later rounds, possibly, but maybe they should just stick it out one more year with Jared Goff. Maybe. So, there's some things that Dan Campbell's Lions still need to address in the offseason, like corner, safety. They could use another edge rusher too. Like, I think I forgot to mention that. They could also they could consider quarterback, but it's not looking in the cards right now for them. So there's still some things for Dan Campbell's Lions to do if they ever want to make a strong push towards being even a wild card contender. But when you see their 2021, sure, they won 3 games. But when you look how they, even if they lost, just look at how they play. And when you see their 2021, they showed some signs. They showed some glimpses of promise toward that goal of potentially competing in the in at least the wild card in at least a couple of years. Our third team on the list for this episode is the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans went 4-13, and going into it beforehand for the Houston Texans, you initially expected a total dumpster fire, and for the Texans, they looked like a leading candidate for the number 1 overall pick, especially in light of what happened in the last 2 years. There was a lot of shit that was happening in Houston all throughout these years. Aside from the shit that's happening in the other side of Houston with the Houston Astros, but the Texans, oh man, they were a complete dumpster fire. Because look what happened with the former head coach and also former general manager, Bill O'Brien. Because Bill O'Brien, dumbass Bob, made the stupid ass decision to trade away DeAndre Hopkins out of Arizona for a mere bag of peanuts. 2nd round pick, washed ass running back David Johnson. And the Texans went 4-12, and that led to his ass getting fired. I think he got fired mid-season. So when you do a stupid ass trade like that, yeah, that's a sign that his ass is getting fired. So the Texans went 4-12. It is clear that the Hopkins trade affected Deshaun Watson, along with the usual disaster piece that was the lack of the offensive line. Yeah, the Texans were pretty much a shit show. Watson had no offensive line, no good receivers to throw to. And after the season ends, Deshaun Watson decided that he finally wants out. He demanded a trade out of that shit show. And we thought that the Jaguars were the all-elite shit show in 2020. But no, it was the Texans for now. The Texans, throughout the offseason in last year, wouldn't budge. They wouldn't hear any offers. On both sides, Watson and the Texans were at a standstill. All of a sudden, in March of 2021, you hear all these allegations from various women coming out against Deshaun Watson. And here you have it. As it stands today, trade talk, nada. Until the legal matters resolve around Deshaun Watson. And then last year, they hired David Coley to be their head coach, who was a Baltimore Ravens assistant coach. And as their general manager, they hired former Patriots director of player personnel, Nick Caserio, to be the next GM. So, first time gigs for both of these gentlemen. But when you look at the grand scheme of things, yeah, people were probably thinking, do we really want to play for the Houston Texans this year or even the next? Really? Do we really want to commit long term to this organization that is undergoing a lot of complete crap? So throughout the offseason, Texans signed a variety of players to short-term deals that include Tyrod Taylor, Philip Lindsay, Mark Ingram, running backs, Desmond King, a corner. So pretty clear, like a lot of these short-term deals that Nick Caserio had no intention of keeping the next year, likely due to salary cap reasons or just didn't care for. So they also wound up losing their franchise defensive player in J.J. Watt to the Arizona Cardinals. I mean, J.J. Watt deserves to go somewhere else at this point, try to win a championship, because, it's been a long time for Mr. Watt. In the draft, they didn't pick until the third round because, the Texans organization in the years prior didn't do anything. They traded away all their picks. I forgot what. Laramie Tunsil, their tackle. So they did select in the third round a quarterback, Davis Mills from Stanford, and Michigan receiver Nico Collins. So two players that would eventually prove key to at least some portion of the Texans season. So this was going to be a relatively very down season for the Houston Texans because no signs of Deshaun Watson coming back at all, and even without all the allegations, he still wasn't going to report to camp and or at least play for the Houston Texans like in camp. So Tyrod Taylor was going to be your starting quarterback. Yeah, this was a prime candidate for the number one overall pick in the coming draft. But as we saw in week 1, this was just like last year's Jacksonville Jaguars. The Texans wound up winning their first game in comfortable fashion against, what turned out to be the worst in them team, the Jaguars. This was pretty much the same formula that happened to the 2020 Jacksonville Jaguars, except now it's the Texans. Because guess what happened in the next 8 games? The Texans lost them all. But also not helping matters was Tyrod Taylor, who actually was doing somewhat well in the 2 games he played, but then he got hurt. So then Davis Mills was forced in early into a starting spot. But then when you look into the grand scheme of things, it was clear that he wasn't ready. He didn't look good in his first couple of games. But then as the weeks progressed, when he played against the likes of the New England Patriots and the LA Rams, he actually looked pretty all right. He held his own. He got the team back in spite of a very limited roster. So, in spite of some poor games in between, those games I mentioned, he actually was slowly growing. Surprisingly, Mills actually managed to keep the Texans in some very close games, even though they ended up losing most of them. The Texans' biggest highlight of the season, all year, was a Week 16 win against the LA Chargers, who, sure, they were depleted by COVID, but the defense of the Texans would actually harass the Chargers offense and Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert had nowhere to go. Absolutely nowhere to go against that defense. And Davis Mills was just a lightning rod. It was just a lightning rod against the Chargers defense. So the biggest highlight of the year for the Texans and Davis Mills, biggest and best game so far. So overall, David Coley actually did a relatively solid job rallying the troops to those 4 wins that he got. I mean, I didn't expect them to get 4 wins at all throughout the season. And he did all he can. He really did all he can to get him to that point. I mean, sure, they ended the season 4-13. 4-13 in spite of the very limited roster. They really lacked in a lot of key areas, like the defense and not really having a lot of big names on the offense. But two names stood out by season's end: Davis Mills, their rookie quarterback, and their wide receiver that just keeps flip-flopping around, but was a big part in the offense, Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks was just surprisingly lights out. Like, he was really lights out in the Texans offense. And once Davis Mills became the quarterback, like, both of them were pretty good with each other. They were really good with each other. So even though David Coley did a solid job getting the team to fight hard throughout the season, it wasn't enough to keep his job after the season. The McNairs and Nick Caserio ended up getting Lovie Smith as their next head coach the following month. And I'm not really sure what to say about Lovie Smith. I do know that he's a 2-time head coach. He's coached the Bears for a long time. He led the Bears to a Super Bowl in 2006 with Rex Grossman as his quarterback. But since then, hasn't had much success. So I don't know how he's gonna fare with the Texans. I mean, sure, he gets another shot, but yeah, I mean, it just makes me wonder why they even fired David Coley in the first place. But either way, yeah, I don't know if it's gonna be one of those seasons for Houston. So looking at the offseason, there are actually plenty of things to address for the Houston Texans. I think the biggest thing is like trying to find some resolution in this Deshaun Watson situation, because I mean, it's finally made to move. It's finally gone to court. But I feel like this Deshaun Watson situation's not going to go away anytime soon. But whenever it does, the Texans should finally just try to find any potential shooters and just trade Deshaun Watson. I know Deshaun Watson has a no trade clause, but once he gets the legal matters settled, and hopefully nothing is too serious. But just work with Deshaun Watson, find a suitor that works with him, and just recoup as much draft capital as possible. And then throughout this offseason, you got to build an offense around Davis Mills. Mills has done a very well job throughout the season, and the Texans shouldn't be looking for a quarterback. The Texans should be smart enough to build around Davis Mills. I mean, it's still debatable whether Mills is going to be the long-term answer over there, but they have to at least build around him for year 2. The first thing that they should do is re-sign their team MVP, Brandon Cooks. He's been Mills' top target. He's had a veteran voice on the limited team, and they could surely need it in year 2. The next thing they got to do is find more receivers for behind Cooks and get a quality running back, because that running game was completely garbage. Another thing they can do is address the front seven, because there was no pass rush at all once J.J. Watt left, and the quarterbacks that they faced pretty much had all day to throw against the Texans and their terrible secondary. So this team really has a long way to go if it wants to go back to being a somewhat respectable football team. I don't know if it's going to be an endless cycle where they just okay, we're just going to keep flip-flopping around with head coaches and all. But I don't know if it's going to be a positive future for the Texans now that they got Lovie Smith and they got Nick Caserio still running the show as GM. But I mean, I guess if they get the right pieces, they can do at least make a little bit of progress in 2022. But that remains to be seen. But considering it's the Texans, it still remains a dumpster fire. So we reached the halfway point of our part 1 of our season recaps. So now let's get to the second half of our part 1. And kicking things off with our second half is I guess you can call it the never ending cycle of the New York teams. And that is the New York Giants. The New York Giants, they're 2021. Oh man. Where do you even start? Where do you even start with the Giants when it comes to their 2021? I guess you could start all the way back in 2016. Ever since they had that dreaded Bieber boat photo right before the 2016 wildcard game against the Green Bay Packers, things had gone completely south for the Blue G-men in New York. They had injury mania the following season that also included a Eli Manning benching from Ben McAdoo, which led to him getting fired, as well as the general manager, Jerry Reese. And then in 2018 and throughout 2019, they drafted Saquon Barkley at number 2 overall, and then at number 6 overall, they drafted Daniel Jones. And I know Giants fans weren't pleased with that at all. And well, throughout those 2 years, it wouldn't result in anything new for the Giants. It would just result in more losing, especially with their second head coach, Pat Shurmur. Their second one since Tom Coughlin stepped down after the 2015 season. The then new general manager, Dave Gettleman, also traded away Odell Beckham Jr. during this time to the Cleveland Browns during the 2019 offseason. As well as letting Len Collins go to the Washington football team in free agency. And then Eli Manning also retired after the 2019 season, which was also yet another abject failure. So going into 2020, they had a little glimpse of hope, I guess, because, the Giants were playing in a really shitty NFC East. I say shitty because, the Cowboys were primed to completely dominate the division, but then week 5 came and Dak Prescott injured his leg against these same Giants. The Giants went 6-10. They were a game short of winning the division because, Washington beat the Eagles thanks to the Eagles tanking in that game. So they went 6-10, barely missing out on winning the division. Head coach Joe Judge, the third head coach in 5 years, seems to have given them some net positives going into next season. So during this recent offseason last year, New York finally seemed primed to finally help Daniel Jones progress as a startable quarterback, because Daniel Jones throughout the years hasn't been good at all. He's been very bad with getting the ball out. He's also taken a lot of sacks, and his biggest problem, turnovers. So the Giants made a lot of moves throughout the offseason to help Daniel Jones progress. They got him an offensive line. They also got Kenny Golladay from Detroit in free agency, and then they drafted receiver Kadarius Toney in the first round. So the Giants seem poised to take at least a step forward in 2021. But then they get to the actual season. Injury mania ran wild again for the Giants all season long, primarily on the offensive side. I mean, nobody on offense would suffer, like not many people on offense would suffer season-ending injuries. But when you look at the key pieces on offense that would be cornerstones, like especially the ones that they signed, Kenny Golladay, Kadarius Toney would miss at least 3 games throughout the season. And then the pieces that were already there, Sterling Shepard, Saquon Barkley, and their quarterback, Daniel Jones, would also miss at least 3 games during the season. They would also lose their defensive captains, the linebacker Blake Martinez and safety Jabril Peppers. They would tear their ACLs in the first half of the season. And that the offensive line, even with the additions they made, it was still sucky. And they were made even more sucky when they lost Nick Gates, Matt Pert, Shane Lemieux. So that offensive line that was getting dealt with injuries, they became even shittier. So I will say this about the Giants, even with all the injuries that were happening, they just couldn't live up to the hype with all these offseason signings. The offense with Daniel Jones under center, they just couldn't find a rhythm. They just couldn't produce anything game-breaking. I mean, I guess with the exception of a Week 4 game against the New Orleans Saints, they just really couldn't get anything going. And then eventually, Jason Garrett, the offensive coordinator, he got fired in Week 13. In the air, Kenny Golladay was a disappointment. He didn't get a touchdown all season. Sterling Shepard, barely targeted by Daniel Jones and was frequently injured. Saquon Barkley was very inconsistent. And I guess the season-ending injuries in the last 2 years clearly impacted his running ability. So what also didn't help with the fact was the team was just the entire team was just completely sloppy, careless, and undisciplined. And Joe Judge didn't do anything to discipline them. He didn't do anything to mature them. So the Giants as a result, were one of the most penalized teams in football. So for all the talk that Joe Judge changed the culture in 2020, it surely didn't look that way in 2021. So things did get worse for New York. Like I mentioned, Daniel Jones was injured and missed some games in 2021, but where he specifically got injured was when he faced the Philadelphia Eagles in Week 12, and he sprained his neck. And it wasn't really clear where he sprained his neck, but that would just be the tipping point for the Giants' already terrible season. So you then get a rotating a quarterback community of Mike Glennon and Jake from State Farm. Yes, I kid you not. So you would just see throughout the rest of the season how bad the Giants are actually how worse the Giants are for somehow without Daniel Jones. So the Giants would score 10 points or less the rest of the way. Except for that one game against the LA Clippers. So sorry, the LA Chargers. So all in all, another season of disappointment for the Giants. Only this past year was just filled with so much more false hope, thanks to injuries and poor play that led to blowout city on a regular basis. Before I get into more shit, I guess there were at least a few highlights that they can take away from this god-awful season. Like, they got that overtime win against the New Orleans Saints, and in that game, probably the best game in the last 5 years, in an all-around team effort. Kadarius Toney, whenever he wasn't hurt, he was a key part of the offense. Was the preferred target, whoever was at quarterback, and defensive ends Dexter Lawrence and rookie Azeez Ojulari. They had a solid year up front on the defensive line, but still, they went 4-13. Another head coaching fire, Joe Judge got canned, and Dave Gettleman, in my opinion, saved face from getting fired by the Mara family, retired. He retired. But again, in my opinion, he just wanted to save face from actually getting fired. So the Giants went on a head coaching search and a GM search. They hired Joe Chosen, I don't really know how to pronounce his name, as the general manager. Chosen was a key piece in drafting Josh Allen. And they, as for the head coaching position, they hired Brian Dabble, Josh Allen's former offensive coordinator. And Dabble was a key piece as well in developing Josh Allen into one of the elite quarterbacks that we see today in the NFL. Now, Daniel Jones is no Josh Allen, but we'll see how Dabble's able to at least try to make Daniel Jones into a somewhat decent quarterback. Man, that's gonna be a tall task for him. But lucky for Mr. Dabble, Daniel Jones, I think he's in a contract year. So this is Daniel Jones' literally last chance. This is his last chance to prove himself. If he doesn't get it done with Brian Dabble, he's not going to get another shot. He is literally not going to get another shot to start in the league. So it remains to be seen if Joe Chosen can sign the right players and, convince the key players to come to New York to play for the Giants. I know the New York is all the glitz and glamour with Times Square and Central Park, but the organization, yeah, it's suspect. So it remains to be seen what these new hires and Chosen and Dabble can bring to the table in the Big Apple. So going into the offseason, there are a lot of things that the Giants need to address, but the biggest things are the offensive line. An offensive line that can stay healthy for most of the season. I know it's going to be hard to find some, both in free agency and the draft, but man, for the last 2 years, the offensive line has been decimated by injuries. And whatever offensive line that Dave Gettleman invested in was producing negative results on the field. The signings that he had couldn't protect Daniel Jones at all. And Jones was frequently getting pressured into turnovers, or he was just taking a lot of hits. So the other thing that Chosen has to do is sign some backups as insurance for Daniel Jones, Saquon Barkley. And I say Saquon too because there's the chance that, he can get injured again. Let's keep in mind that Saquon hasn't had a fully healthy season. I think since his rookie year. I think that's his only fully healthy season. So when it comes to Daniel Jones, though, unless Chosen decides to make a big swing at quarterback via trade or free agency, again, there aren't really that big names all around. So Chosen has to find some insurance. It has to find an insurance policy in the event that Jones gets hurt again or underperforms. So the Giants overall, they're still a dumpster fire. But hiring Dabble as head coach, I guess it's a solid positive for the Mara family. So Brian Dabble's there now. But this is Daniel Jones. Like I said, it's his last chance to do at least a solid job. Now that he has a proven offensive coach in his ear and most of his offensive pieces returning. So the Giants ruled the judge out. The Joe Judge is out. They brought in the Dabble. Now, can they execute in 2022? That remains to be seen. Next up is the other side of New York. The greener side of New York. But even not really. It's not really that green. But we're going to be talking about the New York Jets, who had a similar record as the New York Giants, who went 4-13. So on the other side of New York, it's been pretty much hell for who knows how long for both the franchise and its fans. Especially, who could forget the butt fumble, or most recently, the horrific terror, the reign of terror of Adam Gase and Sam Darnold in New York. Look, who can remember those days? So, when we look back at their 2020, they had a very disastrous year. Actually, 2 disastrous years under Adam Gase. So, in 2020, they went 2-14. Adam Gase actually had an opportunity to get Trevor Lawrence in the 2020 season, but for whatever reason, he decided to start winning games late in the season against the Rams and the Browns. And still, that wasn't enough to keep his job. So, alongside general manager Joe Douglas, the Jets decided to ring in a new era of Jets football. They hired former 49ers defensive coordinator Robert Saleh as the new head coach. It was a good hire by them because they're getting a no-nonsense coordinator for the 49ers, and he produced one of the best defenses in the last 2 years. So during the offseason, their push for a new era continued. They shipped off Sam Darnold to Carolina in a trade weeks before the NFL draft. And then they had a second overall pick. They picked BYU quarterback Zach Wilson, and that pretty much signaled, well, they're going to try this quarterback thing again. So during free agency and the draft, they got younger at key skill positions. They addressed the team needs that they needed by addressing, by adding the likes of Corey Davis, Keenan Cole at receiver, and then they addressed the most important thing that they needed, the offensive line. They selected at their 14th pick, USC guard Elijah Vera Tucker in the draft, and then in free agency earlier, they grabbed guards Dan Feeney and Corey Levin. And then on the defensive side, they got Sheldon Rankins, and then they got LaMarcus Joyner, and then in the draft, they got Michael Carter from Duke. So pretty much overall, they're trying to rebuild on both sides of the ball. And it remained to be seen how Zach Wilson was going to benefit and how he's going to do, because going in, he only had 1 year of starting experience. Prior to that, he was pretty much a backup. He's pretty much a backup in BYU. And also the fact that this was Robert Saleh's first head coaching gig. So a lot of unknowns, a lot of mystery heading for this Jets season. And from the jump, going into their 2021, it was a pretty lull season. What I mean by lull, it was pretty mixed, because the Jets were probably one of the youngest teams in the NFL. Not many of them were like had a lot of years of experience in the NFL. So you had a lot of inexperience amongst the players and the coaching staff. And as a result, there were a lot of losses that resulted in blowouts or not knowing what to do in certain game situations. So in the most instances, the Jets were still the Jets for the most part. But hey, behind those blowout losses were actual room for improvement, and you had some hope for optimism. You know, for once and forever, you had good pass blocking protection. The offensive line was actually not that bad this year. George Fant, Morgan Moses, Connor McGovern, Laurent Duvernay, Tardif, and Elijah Vera Tucker produced a solid front five for the offensive line. And sure, Zach Wilson was pretty bad this year, but then when you look at a few of his games late in the season, he had a solid second half under offensive coordinator Mike LaFleur. He settled in. I mean, sure, he made some careless throws still, but he was all right. Like, definitely better than when he started in the first half of the season. And then when you look at Zach Wilson's receiving options, they were pretty solid as well. Elijah Moore and Braxton Berrios, pretty reliable to stretch the field and get the offense in scoring position. And then you had a backfield of Michael Carter, the running back, and Ty Johnson, and that definitely improved as the season progressed. But on defense, though, they weren't the greatest. They're actually one of the worst, because they allowed an average of 20 or more points per game, and a lot of that had to do with the defensive line having trouble stopping the run, as well as pressuring opposing quarterbacks, and the secondary had problems keeping up with other receivers. But aside from their youth, their inexperience, the Jets did get some surprising wins over the Cincinnati Bengals and the Tennessee Titans. Two teams that would later face each other in the playoffs, and Cincy going to the Super Bowl eventually. But the Jets, of all teams, managed to upset those two. Also, on a positive note, two corners were reliable in coverage and making plays. The safety Michael Carter II and Bryce Hall. Both of them had proven that they can be starters in the secondary next season. So, the Jets went 4-13. Like, again, it's another 4-win season for the Jets under Robert Saleh. But this was a youth movement. This, for the first time in many years, I think Jets fans can be a little bit encouraged by what happened throughout the season. I mean, sure, another like four win season, like on paper, on the surface. I mean, it could be oh, that sucks. The Jets are going nowhere again. Robert Saleh is going to get fired in the next year or two. But when you look at this season, the players actually played hard. They brought some potential. Sure, there were like several blowout losses, but this was the players. Like, a lot of these players haven't been on the field at all. A lot of these players were new. They were pretty young. But when you look at this Jets roster, they bring some potential heading to next season. So speaking of next season, they have some things to do. For the Jets, they got to address the right guard. They have to address that right guard position, because you have Laurent Duvernay Tardif as a free agent. So the Jets, they have to do what they can to re-sign him. I mean, he's probably going to command a very high price, but the Jets have a lot of cap space to meet his needs. I mean, you shouldn't overpay for him, but you gotta re-sign him, because he's literally Zach Wilson's like one of his best pass blockers. And it wouldn't hurt you to add some depth at the position, just in case he gets hurt or you need to rotate him out. They should also sign a wide receiver, a starting wide receiver, and they should also re-sign Braxton Berrios for depth too. So the Jets are going to need some depth behind Elijah Moore and Corey Davis, but those who are not really starting wide receivers. But looking at the free agent market for receivers, it's going to be stacked this offseason. Devontae Adams, the Packers can't afford him. Had Odell Beckham Jr. not gotten injured, then the Jets would have wanted his talents too. So the Jets can make a big offer on a big name like Devontae Adams or a big name like Chris Godwin. It can really help in Zach Wilson's year too. It really can. You give Zach Wilson a big name receiver, and then maybe in the draft you get another top receiver with how many? I think they have 2 picks in the first round. The Jets, they can be a better offensive unit. Not like, significantly better, but better. And then they need a linebacker. None of the linebackers in the rotation for the Jets made an impact in the middle. They need an impact player in that position to improve their defense, get some good defensive plays in and impact the pass rush in a positive way. So the Jets, not a great team by what the record indicates, but when you look between the lines, at least some highlights, they have something to build upon for 2022. They got a lot of young players ready to make an impact, a quarterback ready to take that big leap in Zach Wilson. Granted, he spends the offseason, taking steps to work towards that way. But if they add the right pieces, if that front office adds the right pieces around Zach Wilson, they address the defense, the gangrene side of New York and its fan base, they may have some things to finally smile about, not just in the fall, but maybe down the line. I'm not saying it'll happen 2022 with, we're going to go to the playoffs, pal. But maybe some marginal improvement, and maybe down the line, playoffs. Last but not least, for our part 1 of our season recaps is the Carolina Panthers. Going into 2021 for the Carolina Panthers, they looked primed to at least have a solid foundation under Matt Rule, his rule. So when you look at the Panthers defensively, they were pretty loaded. In the secondary, you had corners like Dante Jackson and CJ Henderson. And then in the draft, Matt Rule went out to, once again, go on defense and select in the first round, JC Horn at corner. And then you had a pretty good linebacking duo of Hassan Reddick and Shaq Thompson. But then you get to the questions. You had questions about your quarterback position, because in 2020, they got Teddy Bridgewater. They signed Teddy Bridgewater to this big deal and you expect them to have, some good results, but then you didn't. They didn't get anything positive from Teddy Bridgewater in 2020, and as a result, he was switching starting duties with a former XFL quarterback, PJ Walker. So the Panthers went 5-11 in 2020, and going into the offseason last year, questions remained about the potential of the offense. So they traded away Teddy Bridgewater to ease those questions, and in return, the Panthers went out to talk to the Jets, say, hey, can we get Sam Darnold off your hands? I know you're trying to get Sam Darnold off your hands, so why not give him to us? So the Panthers got Sam Darnold from the Jets, who were aware, who made themselves well clear that they're gonna get a quarterback in the draft, which they did, getting Zach Wilson. But earlier on, they traded away Sam Darnold to the Panthers, and he was in a new environment under Matt Rule, and he had an offensive coordinator, Joe Brady. And who knew? I mean, was it going to be the Sam Darnold that was going to be seeing ghosts like he did in New York? Or would it be a new Sam Darnold that was going to be, pretty solid? I mean, sure, there were going to be questions, but those questions were about to be answered in 2021. Fortunately for Carolina, Sam Darnold did a good job leading the team to a 3-0 start. Darnold looked more poised with his throws, more comfortable with a more solid receiving core in DJ Moore, and he also had his former Jets teammate, Robbie Anderson. The defense was also pretty damn good during this 3-0 start. They quickly re-established themselves as one of the better pass rushing defensive lines in the league. But the thing was, J.C. Horn in the secondary was only available for that 3-0 stretch, but he made an immediate impact opposite Dante Jackson. Here's where things went off the rails for Carolina during this latest season. They lost to the Dallas Cowboys in week 4. I mean, yeah, the Sam Darnold, it wasn't until the second half where he started to go off. But then again, prior to that, he wasn't doing very well. The Panthers lose that game, and then after that Cowboys game, things completely fell off the rails. The offense as a whole, completely the most. Sam Darnold looked like the scared quarterback that was seeing ghosts, just like he was in New York, throwing multiple interceptions on a weekly basis, failing to secure the football as a whole. I think it was during the Minnesota Vikings game where he was missing a lot of his passes, and he pretty much cost the Panthers a game against the Minnesota Vikings in overtime. And Darnold also got injured during this time. And yes, during this time as well, Carolina was like, fuck it. We're going to sign our former MVP that took us to Super Bowl 50, where we ended up losing to the Denver Broncos and Peyton Manning. We're going to re-sign back Cam Newton. And, I gotta admit, I guess Cam Newton, he did pretty okay during the one time against the Arizona Cardinals. But let's keep things in perspective. The Cardinals didn't have Kyler Murray. They didn't have DeAndre Hopkins. They were also missing a couple key players on defense in that blowout win. Win for the Panthers. So for Cam Newton to say, I'm back. Yeah, he certainly proved that he was back to being a washed-ass bum the next week. So, yeah. Cam Newton certainly wasn't the answer to being the starter. He would continue to do pretty much what Teddy Bridgewater was doing last year, the previous year, switching on and off starting roles with PJ Walker. And then for the final 2 games, Sam Darnold returned from injury, and he would take the starting position permanently. The offensive line also cratered throughout the stretch, allowed many sacks the rest of the way. And I gotta say this about Christian McCaffrey, man. He is a good running back, but man, he's just like Saquon Barkley. He is just so injury prone. His season, once again, cut short. This time by hamstring and ankle injuries. it's very disappointing for Christian McCaffrey. He just can't stay healthy. And Joe Brady scapegoated the offensive coordinator that was supposed to help Sam Darnold. He actually did for at least 3 games, but whatever reason, he just stopped producing. And he was scapegoated by Matt Rule, who pretty much was like mismanaging the quarterback situation in and of itself. And Joe Brady was fired during the team's bye week. Yeah. So the Panthers season, not great. Not great at all. Pretty much a massive disappointment. Sam Darnold, terrible. The offensive line, bad. Christian McCaffrey, his season cut short yet again. The Panthers, I think they only won 2 games. And those were late in the season. Yikes. On a positive note, they did get Stephon Gilmore from the Patriots. And he became a key cog to that Panthers defense. He tried to keep that thing afloat as a shadow corner. And going back to that defensive line, the defense was okay with Hassan Reddick, Brian Burns, and also what was his name? I forgot his name. Oh yeah, Shaq Thompson. They were a good pass rushing trio. They still were, even if the secondary was falling off. Rookie running back Chuba Hubbard did pretty well in relief of Christian McCaffrey with big chunk runs and getting through defenders, and he played pretty well as a pass catching back as well. So in relief of McCaffrey, I could see him in Hubbard getting some more playing time next season. If the Panthers trade away McCaffrey, or they put him in a commit, if they put Hubbard and McCaffrey in like a rotation committee just to reduce McCaffrey's injury risk, who knows? So overall, sure, there were some positives for the Carolina Panthers, but yeah, it just can't be understated that it quickly went down the drain thanks to injuries, poor quarterback play, and Matt Rule's overall mismanagement of the quarterback position, resulting in a 5-12 finish, pretty much the same as last year. And I'm just a little surprised that Matt Rule wasn't fired for his disaster piece to finish the season. I don't know. Do they really want to give him one more chance to try and not fuck things up? Man, we'll see. But man, does he have a lot of work to do. And he doesn't have much money to do it. He only has $18 million to work with in the offseason. And especially when you have guys like Robbie Anderson and Shaq Thompson who have big ass contracts. Yeah, unless they're willing to restructure, or unless the front office wants to restructure, yeah, they don't really have much to work with. They're currently slated to draft a 6th in the draft. So who knows what they're going to pick. They certainly shouldn't pick quarterback, because that's pretty. The quarterback class in the draft this year is pretty weak. But that's something that they should address in 2022. Who's going to be the quarterback? Is it going to be Sam Darnold? Is it going to be someone else? It's clear that, well, neither Sam Darnold nor Cam Newton were the answer in 2021. Certainly it wasn't also PJ Walker, but they can't exactly go into 2022 with only Sam Darnold as the only option at quarterback. But they also can't release Sam Darnold because the dumbasses in the front office decided to pick up his 5th-year option when they traded him for last year. So, yeah, you're pretty much stuck with him. I don't know what you're gonna do. Like, do you go and trade for someone like Jimmy Garoppolo? Do you go and try to go for someone? Do you try to go for the home run swing like Aaron Rodgers? But even if you want to go for that home run swing, you don't have draft capital to take a flyer on that big starting quarterback. So yeah, what do you do? What do you do if you're Carolina if you want a starting quarterback? Like, god damn. I guess you just gotta ride it out with Sam Darnold. I really think you gotta. But if you're gonna ride it out with Sam Darnold, you gotta get an offensive line. That offensive line needs to be rehauled, especially in the interior, allowing 50+ sacks all season long. And if they didn't do anything to fix it, it's inexcusable. It's going to be inexcusable for Sam Darnold or whoever's going to be under center. They're probably not going to find a quality guard or in free agency. There's plenty of good linemen in the draft that's going to be startable in week 1. They got to re-sign Dante Jackson, their corner. He had a good 2021 before he went down with injury, but when he was relatively healthy, pretty damn good. So it remains to be seen what his market's going to be. He's a free agent, but the Panthers should re-sign him. They should re-sign him again at the most reasonable amount. Sign him back and solidify Matt Rule's strong defense. So overall, Panthers crashed and burned in 2021 because they seemed like they picked the right quarterback for Darnold and Sam Darnold, but then they realized they didn't. I mean, let's face it, Sam Darnold did have a good start, 3-0, but then we eventually saw Sam Darnold's deficiencies come back to haunt him yet again, and it derailed the entire team as a result. And the offensive line didn't help matters either. The Panthers gotta decide this offseason if they want to keep him around. In my opinion, they probably have to. They don't have a choice. But if they don't want to keep him around, they have to find a way to get rid of them. Either way, for as good as a defense Matt Rule may have, with this rule, 2021 showed that the rule micromanaged his quarterbacks if things don't go accordingly. So that is a wrap on part 1 of my 2021 NFL season recaps. 6 teams in the books, 25 more to go. Oh man. Don't worry though, we'll get through it. This was only just part 1. We got more to come. But what did you guys think about my team recaps for at least part 1? We covered Jaguars, Texans, Lions, both New York teams in the Giants and the Jets, and the Carolina Panthers. If you were a fan of these teams, how'd you personally feel about your teams this year? Do you think that they'll do bad? Or did you think that they did bad? Did you think that they sucked? Did you think that there's some signs of encouragement? Let me know how you felt about your team in 2021. And let me know how you think that they'll do early in 2022. Do you think that they'll do okay? Do you think that they'll do just as bad or even worse than they did this past season? Let me know your thoughts, however you can. But again, this was part 1 of my 2021 NFL season recaps. We're going to be covering 6 more teams in the next episode in part 2. But that is it for this episode of Very Cold Lasagna. I am your host, DylanLasagna. Thank you for tuning in into this fine episode number 93 of this freezing cold podcast. Make sure you tune into the show however you can, wherever you get your podcasts, be it YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor FM, Google Podcasts. Follow the show on social media at Very Cold Lasagna. And as always, keep that lasagna very cold in the fridge with your takes on the world of pro wrestling and sports. Very cold in the fridge with the icy and spicy lasagna. And until next time, peace out.